Joining us now, Time Magazine's managing editor, Mr. Rick Stengel. He's here, as he always is, to reveal the latest issue of Time. Also with us, Tom Brokaw. Tom, good to see you.
Good to see you, Rick. I have a question for you about the cover on the Constitution, because...
Hey, you just revealed the cover, Tom. I'm supposed to
we have a dramatic
cover.
Moment, Tom,
Okay.
every week, and you've just spoiled it completely. Let's pretend that never happened.
What's on the cover?
I only got the curtain up that high. You can raise it all the rest of the way.
We'll do a do-over. Tom, as you said, it's a cover about the Constitution in our life right now. And right now, on the campaign trail, wherever you go, people are talking about what's constitutional, what's unconstitutional, the big issues that are facing us, whether it's Afghanistan, Libya, the debt ceiling, they all have constitutional implications. Mr. Brokaw.
Gay marriage.
Gay marriage.
You didn't mention that.
Well, I only had 4,000 words to write about it, so. And even as the editor, I can't make it too long.
You asked the question, does it still matter? If you couldn't see the visual on your screen, it has essentially the Constitution going through a paper shredder. So answer the question, Rick. Does it still matter?
Yes, of course it still matters, but in some ways it matters less than people think, because people all the time are debating about what's constitutional and what's unconstitutional. To me, the Constitution is a guardrail. It's for when we're going off the road and it gets us back on. It's not a traffic cop that keeps us going down the center. And what our politics are about conflict. There was no people who argued more about defining principles of America than the framers of the Constitution. They argued both sides of the most powerful issues in American history: slavery, states' rights, central government. So to say that what did the framers want is kind of a crazy question, I have to say, and I write about that in the piece.
Well, why? You mean it's you're saying it's a living document, must constantly be interpreted and reinterpreted in the modern day?
Yes, and I kind of hate the phrase "a living document," and I know it's you know, people,
it's out there.
Originalists, it's out there. But it's an interpretive document. It's an elastic document. I mean, the way I begin the piece, which it's embarrassing to read, but here are a few things the framers did not know about: World War II, DNA, sexting, airplanes, the atom, television, Medicare, collateralized debt obligations. I mean, so to ask what would George Washington think about drone warfare in Libya, a guy who didn't even know what an airplane was, seems like kind of a silly question.
Well, the Federalist Papers show us that these men were grappling with fundamental principles and how to make arrangements in which those principles were protected or advanced, yes?
I completely agree, and I think what the genius of what they did was they said, you know what, let's reckon with these principles, let's set out some basic guardrails, some basic guidelines, and then, who knows, 50 years from now, 100 years from now? I mean, Franklin thought the Constitution wouldn't even last a generation. He's one of the principal framers. So yes, call on the wisdom of them, but part of their wisdom was that they actually made a document that would keep us on the road for all of these years, in part because we could swerve from left to right.
And the ink was really not yet dry when they began to make an interpretation of the Constitution. Marbury versus Madison, for example.
Exactly.
The Dred Scott decision.
Right. So so John Marshall, who was the Chief Justice then, basically very early on said the document is to be interpreted by the courts and by the Congress. I mean, later, writing the Bill of Rights. And then I would argue, as I do a little bit in the piece, that the Reconstruction Amendments, particularly the 14th Amendment, which made the Bill of Rights applicable to the federal government and to everybody, basically gave citizenship to black Americans, was the transformative moment for the Constitution. And that happened over 100 years later.
We got a couple polls that come out in this issue of Time Magazine. I want to put up on the screen. Yeah. Should the government follow exactly what's spelled out in the Constitution, or should it interpret based on changes in society? 41% of Americans, according to this new Time poll, say it should be followed exactly. Another question: the Constitution gives the power to declare war to Congress. This as it pertains to the question of Libya. Presidential war powers has authority to go to war. 44% does not have the authority. 50%.
Right. So, which is a really interesting statistic, because that's an issue that's coming up now. But if you look, again, I would say it's a genius of the Constitution. Some people would say it's a flaw. Is that in Article 1, the Constitution says Congress has the power to declare war, and in Article 2, it says the President is Commander-in-Chief. There's a lot of white space between those two things, and throughout our entire history, we've been figuring out, well, who can really do what? I would argue, I think it's a legitimate argument to say, is the War Powers Act itself unconstitutional?
Yeah,
right?
That's still an argument also.
Right. Does that limit the power of the presidency? And you have now Republicans who are saying Obama is using too much executive power. I mean, George Bush was the greatest exponent of executive power probably in our history except for Abraham Lincoln. So, when your view is from where you sit, and if you're sitting in the Oval Office, you tend to think executive power is a good thing.
If you are the executive. Let me ask you, Richard, we all worry about historical literacy. Americans are forgetting their history. They're forgetting their founding documents. What'd you find out with regard to what Americans know about their Constitution? I wonder if they have it confused with the Declaration of Independence. Sometimes you hear them quoted back and forth. I'm just curious, what did you find out?
You hear presidential candidates confusing the Declaration.
Well, I guess you do.
Yes. Well, I mean, Michelle Bachmann did, and I believe Ron Paul did. Now, by the way, I don't mind that confusion. in the sense that the Declaration is the music and the Constitution is the lyrics, and you can't have one without the other. In fact, it was Lincoln who said, "I've never made a constitutional decision that wasn't informed by the values in the Declaration." I think we all feel that way. The Declaration is poetry that we all live by. So, but I do think Americans don't know much about the Constitution. They know, there was a poll when I was at the National Constitution Center years ago where Americans knew more Americans knew who the Three Stooges were than the three branches of government. And on the other hand, there is a good aspect of that. People are living their lives, which is what the Constitution was created to allow them to do. So it's not like we have to refer to it every moment.
To have a sense of security in a way.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, I remember reading that I think it was Justice William O. Douglas who carried a copy of the Constitution in his suit jacket every day. Wherever he went, it was there. Do members of the U.S. Supreme Court still do that? Do you happen to know?
I think they do, and I remember hearing Justice Breyer say that he did that. I think a number of them do, and of course now you can have it on your desktop or laptop and be able to search it. But I think a lot of them do carry it around. Senator Byrd used to carry it around.
Sam Ervin.
Yep.
Who ran the Watergate hearings?
Yeah.
He carried the Constitution.
It's not that long. It's 7,000 words.
Right. I have a small pocket-sized copy. I don't carry it with me all the time. I often have it at my bedside, and I find it very useful.
They sell little copies at my local stationery store.
Okay.
Tom, Rick's also got an interview in the magazine with General Petraeus. You just sat down with us talking about the speech last night. The president's announcement of the drawdown is probably more than General Petraeus would have liked. What's your reaction to last night's speech?
Well, we were talking about it earlier. I think the president, as he often does, as Rick said, kind of split the middle. But I think in this case, it was probably the wisest course. In fact, we've been there 11 years. It's time for the Afghans to take responsibility for their own country and their own security. There is another issue, as far as I'm concerned, and that is the militarization of America around the world. Wherever we are now, it's in a Kevlar helmet and a vest and a locked and loaded weapon of some kind. And I think that we have to begin to transition out of that and present a different kind of face to represent all of our values. It's not that these people haven't done heroic work and very important work, and they do try to do the hearts and minds. But having been over there a number of times, you know how difficult it is when you go into a village and the villagers begin to back off because they're going through the pickups trying to find illicit weapons, or they're going in and shaking down men who they don't know from the village. So I think it really is time for a new tack. We're going to have 70,000 troops there in late 2013. And that's still a lot of people. And it's worth pointing out, we're not getting the help that we should be from our NATO allies. I mean, Secretary Gates said that on the way out. Some of them were very strong at the beginning, like the Poles and others, but the Germans, the Brits have been better, but the Germans and a number of other countries have sent people there, smaller numbers, and they stay in their bunkers. They're not out there on patrol every day.
We don't even get enough help from the members of the country we are fighting so hard for. Karzai, his government,
I think
many others there. I mean, what a fix.
If you're a parent and you have a child in Afghanistan and you hear some of the things that Karzai says about we're occupiers and we're abusing their country, you want to get on the phone and say, it's time to come home.
Yes.
But that's also why his speech was for domestic consumption. It was for Americans here. It's for people who are tired of it.
The Eikenberry speech,
No, Obama's speech last night
I beg your
was
pardon.
for a domestic audience.
And Tom said it, it's worth underlining. Yes, 33,000 troops are coming out. That leaves 70,000, which is twice as many as when Obama came into office.
And the domestic argument is a legitimate argument. It is time for nation building at home. When we went into Iraq, you'll remember Paul Wolfowitz and others said, well, the oil revenues, we'll be paying for this. Right. We'll be paying for this war within 6 or 7 months once we get the oil up and running. We've spent more than $1 trillion on both these wars, and we're still in a free fall at home. Bernanke said yesterday the headwinds are stronger than we expected them to be. We don't know what's going to happen yet in Europe again. Spain is in real trouble, to say nothing of Greece. And these are all great pressures on the American economy coming into 2012. If you're an average citizen out there, of course you're sitting on your wallet. You don't know where it's going to go.
But he needs to say what the nation building at home will be.
Yeah.
Rick,
Okay.
thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Look forward to getting through the new issue of Time Magazine, Does It Still Matter? The Constitution Shredded, the cover story by Rick himself. Thanks so much. We'll be right back.